All right, so welcome to INV3027, which is Develop an Investigation Plan. So we talked a little bit yesterday about planning. This goes into a little bit more detail about what's involved. What I guess I will say right from the outset is that developing an investigation plan, if you're a new investigator, is something you probably won't do, right? So as a new investigator, typically you'll be employed, I say this in a general sense, by one of the bigger investigation companies. So I've mentioned a few of them yesterday: Quantum Corp, Verifact, SureFact. There's other really big ones that have networks of hundreds of investigators across Australia. That's most likely where you will get your start. And what you will be doing is stuff like insurance, compulsory third party, slip and falls and that sort of stuff. Don't worry about that. That's what I did. So I left the police force as a very high-ranking detective, and I was investigating slips and falls. Okay, so you've got to accept that's your way into the industry. Now, the reason I raise that is, are you going to be doing a complex investigation plan in relation to any of those things? The answer is no. Why? Because you, as an investigator, you'll get given a file on the system, whatever system those companies use, and that will basically tell you what they want you to do. Interview these 3 people, interview this claimant, take some pictures, measure up, whatever. So you'll be basically told, and look, that is a plan in its simplest form, okay? Once you start to do work for yourself or do more complex investigations, workplace investigations, or have your own clients, there will be a need, definitely, for you to develop some investigation plans. And that's a bit of what we'll talk about today, okay? So you need to sort of think about, any plan is think about what you're going to do when you're going to do it. Now there's other complexities to it, of course, like what's it going to cost and what do I need and how much time do I have and all those sort of things. What are the risks? They're all things to take into account. In the end, a plan can be a one-page written thing on a piece of paper saying who you're going to interview and when and in what order, because that's important as well. What evidence you're going to gather and that sort of thing. Okay, so we will go through this. At the end, I've got a little scenario I'll give you. I'll cast you into the role of a local government investigator. We'll show you a little video, and then I'm going to ask you to think about, all right, what you need to do and in what order. So this is just a thinking exercise. Okay, so investigation planning, if we're talking about confirming requirements, okay, so that's very important. So being able to confirm what's actually needed with a client is very important. And they talk about 3 things here: purpose, scope, and timeframes. Okay, Paul has already discussed in some of the other units what scope is. And just to go over that again, an investigation scope is basically what the client wants you to do. Okay, typically as an investigator, you help the client write that. Well, more likely than not, you write it and give it to the client, and they agree to it, and there's a bit of back and forwards. So scope's important because, if a client just says, can you investigate this? Well, what does that look like? Do you spend 3 weeks? Is it a week? It needs to be some scope and time frames set around it. What the time frames are, what the purpose is of your actual investigation. So you need to know the purpose, why is it being conducted. You need to know what resources you have. Now, in reality, it's just you. It will always be just you. Probably unlikely unless you're in a really big team to be, in a team of investigators. But look, that may happen into the future. So you need to determine those things. So when you're taking instructions, and again, we're talking more of you having your own personal clients here, okay? When you're taking instructions, you need to know about what information. So have a little think about what information you're meeting a client, say an insurer or a lawyer who might be representing somebody. You're meeting them for the first time. Have a bit of a think for a minute or two about what sort of questions are you going to ask them. What are you after as an investigator? We've already talked about what is the scope. So what do they exactly want done? Anything else you can think of? You fellas think of anything?
You'd really be wanting some definite clarity in what they're actually specifically wanting.
Yep.
And the reason behind it, so instead of
Why is that, do you think?
Because, you know,
Yeah.
if you can do that in 3 days and find out what they need, it's better than 2 weeks and you're chasing your tail and they go, I really only wanted to know that. You
That's
didn't need
right.
to tell me this.
Exactly,
So
yeah.
if you get it from the get-go, you know where you're going.
Yep. Okay, so that's good. So let's say, for example, you were sent out by a client to interview somebody who's off sick with a hurt leg because they fell off a roof and it's a work cover claim. That's a fairly typical thing that you might find yourself doing to start off with. So you need to know, well, all right, there were 25 people that witnessed it. Does that client want you to speak to them all? That's going to take a long time, isn't it? And going to cost them a lot of money. Or do they just want 2 or 3 of the closest ones and maybe the person's manager spoken to? So this is why getting instructions is really important. This is what scope's all about. Because you don't just open yourself, yeah, I'll go and investigate it. You could say that, but then you turn out there's 20 or 30 witnesses, there's all this evidence. That's a massive 6-month job, which would cost that client, you know, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, when all they really wanted was the person interviewed, some medical documents and 2 witnesses. So very important. And this is when you're planning, this is important to get this down. So other information, you know, how long do they want it done by? Exactly what, you know, are there some issues that they want focused on? Now, a word on that, and this comes back to investigative ethics. When you're working for a client, that client is paying you money, okay? When there's money exchanged from a client to yourself, there's an expectation that you're working for them, and you are. But you just got to remember, and this is a bit of a judgment call, you've got to remember that your ethics as an investigator are that you investigate things objectively, transparently, and don't have any bias or anything, okay? You gather evidence and make judgments on the evidence. It's not a fact that, you know, I want you to investigate this person because I want to get rid of them. Can you please make sure this, and this? Like Paul said yesterday, that's a matter of communication. Look, say it's not, I can't do that, I'll investigate it and report back to you. So that can be sometimes sticky. Identify the scope we've talked about. Determine the scope. So terms of reference, resources and equipment available. Again, look, majority of the time, this is not going to be applicable to you unless you've got some sort of major investigation. But what resources do you need? Paul talked this morning about, do you need an expert? Is there a computer or a phone that you think might have evidence that may assist your investigation? And of course, we know what you do is recommend to the client that that gets forensically analysed. Of course, you provide the client with how much that's going to cost and the benefits of doing that or not doing it, and let them make the decision. Okay, if they go, yep, okay, it's going to cost you $2,000. These are the benefits. Might provide evidence of this or that. They might go, yes, okay, go and do that again. So you need to determine that not only at the start when you're planning, but during the investigation as well. Do you need any equipment? You know, simple things like any good investigator, I'll tell you now, and we can talk probably more about this later, will have a certain number of things. If you're an investigator starting off, have a bit of a think for a minute about what do you need. I'll tell you the first one, a digital voice recorder, okay? What are some of the other ones? Let's bring some chat people in. What do you need? You're sitting in front of one at the moment. You definitely need one of them. Computer, okay. What else? Think outside the square. Yep, a phone. Car would help. Well, you know, you can get around, I guess, without one, but a camera, a still camera.
And a camcorder.
And a video, okay. Yep, wouldn't hurt. Anything else? Paul.
Thanks, Greg. We have so binoculars,
Yep.
internet,
Yep.
a car, and what would be handy in the car is a dash cam for
Yes.
your vehicle follows.
Yes. Great. Okay. You can go crazy with this. You know. You need notepads, all these sort of things. Do you need a tape measure? What if you're at a job with a slip and fall where you have to measure something? Okay, they're pretty cheap, Bunnings. Now, everyone knows the wheels, so they're the measuring wheels. You can go to any hardware store or Total Tools or stuff like that, buy one for not very much. If you've got to measure the distance on a road, that might be a couple hundred metres, You're not going to be pulling out your tape measure to do that. You need one of those measuring wheels. A can of spray paint, okay? Just things to think of. I'm not saying, by the way, rush out and buy all these things. I'm just saying things you might need in your day-to-day job. I've got a can of spray paint and a measuring wheel. I think I've used it twice. Okay, but it's there, okay? Again, you're a subcontractor. It's a tax deduction. Not tax advice, by the way, but I'm sure it is. So if you think of any other things you'll need, there's lots of different things that will become handy for you as an investigator, but some of those ones are great. Dash cam, yes. Video for video stuff. I mean, you can use your phone for video, we know that. You can use your phone for recording. My advice, best practice, don't. Your phone is your phone, okay? Use proper devices for that if you can. That's not to say you can't. As we go through, have a think about what other resources you need. When you're developing your investigation plan, obviously you're going to have to think about, well, what sort of investigation is this? You'll know whether it's factual or surveillance. Okay. Again, if there's a need for surveillance, say for a work cover matter where you've reported some things and you've found some evidence that a claim may be fraudulent, you may recommend to the client that they conduct surveillance. Okay. Whether they do or not is a matter for them, because that can be quite expensive. And you may not do it. Okay. What else are you going to need? Data analysis, forensics, the list goes on. We've sort of talked about them. Okay, other information in consultation with relevant persons to clarify investigation requirements. So when you're talking with clients, and this goes back to one of those core traits we talked about yesterday, right from the start, communication. Very important that if this is a weakness for you as an investigator, it's something you need to improve, okay? Not only taking statements and interviewing people, but talking to clients, being able to negotiate and that sort of thing. But there's lots of different techniques, and in this course we don't talk about things like active listening. We don't talk about body language. We don't talk in detail about empathy and all that sort of stuff, and ways to diffuse escalation and all that sort of stuff. These are all, again, extra learning techniques for you. But using communication techniques is vitally important. Be aware of terminology. Obviously, you're talking to a client, you don't want to load them up with jargon, PI jargon, as you could say. Use simple language. Same with your reports. Use simple language. Some people get into the zone of trying to make things more complex to make themselves look and sound more professional, I guess. And you don't need to do that. You just don't. People, especially clients, want to just read something that's factual and simple to read. Okay. Be culturally aware. That's another thing. Not only with dealing with clients, I suppose, but that's also very important when dealing with who? Witnesses and persons of interest. So again, we don't have time here to talk a lot about culture and the different arrangements, but obviously if somebody's from a non-English speaking background and you need to interview them, what are you going to do?
Use an interpreter?
Yeah. Of course, before you did that, because there's a cost to that, what are you going to do?
You're going to try and interact with the person as best you possibly can.
Yep. If you're going to use an interpreter, you would want to get the client's permission because there's going to be a cost. And you'd be explaining to the client, well, they can't give very good evidence because their English is really broken. I'm going to need an interpreter to interview them. You're going to have to hire one to come with me. Okay, you communicate to that. Or we could not hire one, and I won't be able to get a statement. If you've got to get a statement from a child, I'm not, and you probably aren't trained to interview children because they're specialist skills to have. So you may need to engage someone else that can do that, whether it's a child psychologist, I don't know. Just things that you need to think of, okay? If you're interviewing, say, a First Nations person, Indigenous person, what would you need to think about? Are there any special cultural considerations yet? Should they bring an elder or a support person with them? Those sort of things. Obviously, a child, parent, or guardian, but all those sort of culturally aware things that you need to know. Okay. Again, I can't sit here all day and go through every scenario. You just need to have a think. All right, this person can't speak English very well. What do I need to do? Or they're deaf. Do I need an interpreter? All sorts of things. I think it's common sense. Rights and responsibilities in relation to conducting investigations and evidence. So, as we've sort of said before in a couple of other units, you need to confirm your legal capacity and what policy procedure you're working under. Okay. Your legal capacity to investigate, of course, is your licence as an investigator. So you're allowed to do certain things. We would know that. When you're investigating certain things, you probably want to have an idea of what acts you're working under. So it could be something to do with the Work Cover Act or the Personal Injury Act, or there's other acts that relate to CTP. Again, you don't need to drag these out and read every word and section of them. Just know they exist and have an idea of what legislation you're working under. If you're to do an investigation plan, you probably want to have those things in there as well. Authorisation is always good. Now, if you're working for private clients, as we do, we work for government, local government, state government clients and other private clients, you need some sort of authorisation from them. That's to cover you. You don't want that to come back. So that could be an email, or that could be some sort of letter of authorisation authorising you. Now, when we do our investigations, our plans are actually full plans with scopes in them, and they're signed off by the client. Okay, so we have that where we provide them what we're going to do, how long it's going to take, what it's going to cost, what resources we will need, what evidence we're going to gather, who we need to talk to, what we need access to, all different things, and who's signing off. Okay, when we keep that when we do it. In relation to where else can the other legislation be found, depends what you're working on. Okay, policy and procedure. If you're doing a job, a workplace investigation job, you're obviously investigating breaches generally of policy and procedure. Sometimes you can be investigating bullying or sexual harassment, so that could be things applicable like the Anti-Discrimination Act, the Human Rights Act, okay, or if you're investigating bullying, it could be something, you could be investigating that according to what the definition is under, say, the Fair Work Australia definition of bullying, or in Queensland, for example, the Queensland Industrial Relations Commission. Again, I don't say any of this to confuse you, just things you need to think about what you're working under. Relevant policies and procedures. If you're doing a job for a client and you're investigating something, a fraud, for example, what does their policy say about it? You probably want to have a look at that before you start. You know, because if you're investigating a breach of something, you want to know the elements of what it is actually breaching. A lot of government and other corporate organisations have codes of conduct. Okay, you want to have a look at that and actually narrow down, okay, this is the alleged breach, that they did this and it's against this part of the code of conduct. Okay, codes of conduct. Workplace health and safety. Again, you're doing a safety investigation, an accident, there'll be a Workplace Health and Safety Act there you want to look at. Digital sexual harassment, bullying, fraud we've talked about. What are your responsibilities to undertake investigations? Well, we've talked a lot about ethics, okay? And I did say to you that it is difficult sometimes as a private investigator working for a client paying you money. Okay, they want sometimes a certain, or there's an expectation of a certain result. So you've just got to be very careful to maintain your investigative ethics when you're doing that. Okay, very different with local, state and federal government because they work under their own ethics codes anyway. So they're very careful not to influence you in any way. Sometimes private clients can want to influence you. It's a fine line to tread. Okay, I can't sit here every situation and tell you, you know, this is what you must apply to that one and this one in this scenario. It's just up to you. Just remember your investigative ethics and, you know, what you are. You're an evidence gatherer. You know, you apply fair process to everybody. You treat everybody fairly. You're objective. You're transparent. Okay, you don't have any bias. You don't have any conflicts of interest. These are all things you must think of. Privacy is one we've talked about a lot. We've talked about the Privacy Act and that sort of thing. And I guess, you know, following on from what Paul said this morning, again, you don't need to get bogged down in the whole privacy and confidentiality stuff. Just, you know, if it doesn't feel right, you know, look into it and fix it up. Surveillance, listening devices, etc. We have talked a little bit about things like trackers on cars. So some of you in some states that's illegal. New South Wales, I think, is illegal. In our great state of Queensland, of course, we can put a tracker on your car. It's not illegal. So same thing with listening devices. So recording people without their consent is okay in Queensland as long as you're a party to the conversation. You go across the Tweed River into New South Wales and it becomes unlawful and you actually get charged by the police. So check your own state and territory whether you can do that sort of thing. There'll probably be a flurry of questions coming in now about listening devices and when I can't record that. No, there normally is.
No, it's got to be a GPS thing. So if you were in
Yeah.
Queensland,
Yeah.
the car went over the border, do you have to cease the tracking it?
Well, how can you when it's on the car?
Yeah, okay.
It's a bit difficult, isn't it? Yeah. So again, I think Paul did mention you just got to be careful. You know, that's not going to be a situation that occurs every day, I suppose. But look, always act in good faith. That's what I say. Well, if someone was in Brisbane and you had a tracker on their car and they happened to drive to Byron Bay, when you didn't know that, well, I mean, I don't think you're certainly not breaching the law. I think you'd have a good argument there. Procedural fairness is a big one. Okay, it's a big one for investigators generally. It's certainly a massive one for things like workplace investigations. So I would love to sit here for basically the rest of the day and talk to you about procedural fairness, but I can't. All I will say to you is that it's all about the person you're interviewing particularly has the right to know what they're being interviewed about. That goes without reason. They have a right to have a say. They have a right of reply. That's the second thing. Everybody has that right. And they have a right to be judged on whatever you're investigating based only on the evidence, not what you think about them or their workmates think about them or don't like them. It's all about evidence as an investigator. That's what you've got to remember. I hope that makes sense. And compliance with company procedures. All right, so determining investigation methodology. So this is about gathering and assessing information to support your investigation and confirming validity of sources. So we'll talk a bit about that because this is another big issue for private investigators, particularly with private clients. Okay, think, for example, a client comes to you and says, "Can you track down my ex-boyfriend/girlfriend?" Okay. Your first thought is, yeah, I can do that. I'm licensed. What's your second thought? Give me some ideas. What's your second question?
Well, you've got to take into consideration, I want to find my ex-girlfriend. Is it because she has an apprehended violence or he can't approach it?
Maybe, yeah. Anyone disagree with that? Your next question basically is why. That's what you're asking yourself. You will ask the client, of course, is why. Okay, so it is very important to validate information received, and that's not only from private clients, but can be from other clients as well. I mean, it's not stuff, again, you have to necessarily do if you get a job through Verifact Quantum Corp as an investigator. They've done all that for you, which is good. Okay, so how do we validate information? So I want to track down my ex-girlfriend. You say, I can do that, why? And they say, oh, because I've got some stuff I need to give back to her. Look, firstly, I'll ask this of you. Are alarm bells starting to ring? Is something doesn't feel right in you about that or not? I don't know, it might be legit.
You know, why do you not know where she lives? If you've just got her stuff and you've just got to drop it off,
Yeah.
why do you not know where she lives? Why are you not in contact with her? Why
Yeah.
would you need a third party to get in contact with her?
Fair enough, yep. So these are questions you ask yourself, yep. Anything else? Anyone out there online? Anything else you'd be asking?
Someone's here has got, I'd be checking the VRO.
I don't know what that is.
I have no idea what the VRO is, I'm sorry. Yeah, as Luke said, if they wanted the partner to if the partner wanted to know where they lived, they would know, wouldn't they? Like, that's pretty much what Luke said.
Well, maybe.
Okay, so the VRO is a violent restraining order, which must be...
All right, okay. Look, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, and I'm talking particularly in domestic matters, okay, you need to validate the information you're getting. You need to ask yourself why. Why does this person want to track down their ex-girlfriend or their wife or whatever? So do some digging. You don't have to take the job. You know what I mean? You don't have, just because you are a private investigator, you don't have to do it. There may be sinister reasons for it. So again, it's about validating the information. Okay. Again, some employers may look. I've had this. I can tell you this sort of anecdotally, that they want to dismiss an employer. They want to get rid of them in some way for whatever reason. And they want the outcome of your investigation to support them. Now, we've just talked about ethics, okay? And we've talked about objectivity and non-bias and all that. Keep that in mind. You don't have to take a job if you feel that way. You don't have to take a job if someone wants you to find their ex and things aren't right with you and things aren't adding up. Again, one of the easiest ways you can validate information from a client is ask questions, ask lots of questions, have a meeting with them. All right, they want to give you a briefing over the phone, they're prepared to transfer $2,000 into your account this afternoon to get you started. For me, no, that's not enough. Let's meet, I want to ask you some questions and validate why you want this. May be legitimate, okay? If you're a surveillance investigator, hang on, you know, it's a legitimate activity to conduct surveillance on a cheating spouse. Okay, that's what some surveillance operatives do. Nothing unlawful about it. It's to sometimes gather evidence to the party that wants you of another partner's infidelity. Can sometimes, well, typically it's not used in divorce and that, with no fault divorce and that these days. It doesn't really matter. But then you'd be asking, well, all right, you want me to get all this information when you're pretty sure that they're cheating anyway. Well, then what's the point? Okay. Generally, when the hackles go up, something doesn't feel right, it's not. So ask yourself the questions and take time in validating the client's information. Why do they want this? You know, maybe they're chasing old Uncle Jack who lives in Cairns somewhere because Auntie Flo from North Hampshire in London died and left him some money. So that's probate investigations are quite legitimate. I've done a few of them. Okay, but again, it's about validation. Paul.
Thanks, Greg. I was just going to add to that is something I use is my gut. Always trust your gut. When you get these calls, you will know in yourself the questions, the marks will be going in your head of, hang on, is this legit? And really, often in investigation, in many areas of what you do, trust your gut and go with your gut. If it doesn't mean if you don't feel good about something, you just don't do it. It means that if you don't feel good about something, you need to ask questions to sort of clarify that feeling, that natural feeling you've got about it. Just go, okay, I need to ask more questions so I feel more comfortable. I'll either take this job or I won't. So, yeah, go with your gut.
Thanks, Paul. Look, so we've talked about selecting investigation methods. Again, we're talking about it. How do you comply with legal requirements for collecting, preserving, presenting evidence? We've talked about pickings, factual surveillance. We don't need to talk about that anymore. These questions, who, what, where, when, why, how. Now, if you haven't seen this or ever heard of the 5WH thing, you need to familiarise yourself with it. When we do interviewing tomorrow, this will become really relevant. And you might think, yeah, I know these things, who, what, where, when, why and how. Have that cycling around in your head whenever you're talking to anybody, whether it's a client, whether it's a complainant, a victim, a witness, or an offender, person of interest. Answer those questions, who, what, where, when, why, how. And then answer those to the answers. Again, tomorrow we'll take you through that as well. In selecting investigation methods, it's about evidence management principles. So we've talked a little bit about the chain of evidence and how important it is if you get a piece of evidence, where to keep it. Okay, so it should be locked up. There should be some sort of register, and that register could just be a table in the back of your notebook about the ins and outs of anything you might have gathered. That's okay. In the end, ultimately, you've got to be able to satisfy yourself and court, tribunal, client, whomever, that the evidence you collected was safely stored and secured and then disposed of. How you do that exactly is a matter for you. So you must collect evidence as to not to compromise anything, maintain to ensure that's not altered or tainted. Okay, so who had access to it, etc. And it's got to be handled correctly. The chain of evidence is vital. So if you've never heard of the chain of evidence, it's also called evidence continuity, and a few other terms as well. Think of it as, say I'm holding a giant, steel chain. Okay, at this end of the chain is me collecting whatever it is. Could be a piece of paper, could be a computer, mobile phone, anything. At this end of the chain is when I've got rid of it. So that's not broken. If I'm pulling that, it's not broken. Think of how you would break it if it was evidence. Okay, it went from here to here and you don't know who took it or how it got there, or it was chucked in a drawer and it wasn't secured. That's what breaks the chain of evidence. So if you just think of that when you've got some piece of evidence, don't break the chain. There's the chain there, broken. Okay, what resources and equipment will you need to meet your investigation brief and budget? We've sort of talked a few about this. Has anybody come up with any more? We've talked about cameras, we've talked about dash cams, we've talked about notebooks, we've talked about digital recorders, computers, cars, still cameras, trackers if you have them. I have one because I can use it if I want. Surveillance, what are you going to need? A fake, will you need a, fake Tom Selleck mustache? Or a pair of, or a wig or something?
Binoculars.
Binoculars, yep. If you're doing surveillance, probably one of the standard things, you will have a change of clothes, another hat. If you go from static to mobile surveillance, so you might be watching someone's house and they move, you might follow them in the car, and they go into a shopping centre, you might follow them in there. Probably would be handy. And we'll talk about this a bit more when we do surveillance, to have a different hat, maybe a different shirt. Okay, so things to think about. Be mindful of any legislative restrictions. We've talked about this on listening devices. We've talked about that a bit already. Video recorders, where and when you can't record. Okay, we did have a discussion yesterday about house and the reasonable expectation of privacy and that sort of thing, and tracking devices. Okay, so what are the risks associated with any of these methods, and how do you determine the investigation risks? So risk management in relation to investigation planning is something that you generally won't undertake unless you're doing, a more complex investigation. Okay, but with risk is a chance of something happening, okay, and the consequences of it happening. So think about it like that. So if you're doing an investigation, you need to think about what sort of risks are there, and these are things that should go in your plan if you're doing one for a more complex investigation. So there are literally hundreds of different risks, from volatile people to not being able to find certain witnesses, to not having the legislative ability to get certain documents, all sorts of risks, and how are you going to deal with them? A couple of different things. SWOT analysis I wouldn't worry too much about. You just need to know what that is. I'm not sure if that's a question. So that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, risk assessment, etc. What are the limitations? Well, know your own limits. When again, we've talked about this in the last unit. What are your own limits? You're not going to jump into a computer and try and forensically analyse stuff and download stuff. You send those to the experts. Okay. If you've got a sample of something, for example, you're not going to try and do it yourself. Don't go beyond them. Know your authority. So ask yourself, can you do things like this? Let's have a bit of a talk about these. Can you impersonate a cop? No, it's actually against the law. Okay, can you go through a red light? So what if you're doing surveillance? You've got to remember you're licensed to legally stalk people, and old mate just beats the light. Would you go through it or not? Okay. That good? Okay. That's ethical.
That's just,
Very hard to follow people in a car doing surveillance and not break any road rules, I can tell you.
well, yeah, but this isn't a training sense.
No, that's right. So good answer. There is no answer. I'm not giving you any answers. I'm not saying you can't do it. Of course you can't. It's against the law to go through a red light, isn't it? Or do a UE when you can't. Of course. That's right, yeah. But again, judgment call, up to you. Think about your ethics. Make a pretext call. So we have discussed this. So a pretext call is actually something used by investigators all the time. Okay? It's calling someone up and pretending to be someone else. Can we do that? What do we think? Can we / should we? Any ideas from the crew? Can we / should we / would we? It is a bit like that, yeah. Any thoughts from the online community, Paul?
Okay, so we have a couple people saying it depends if you're requesting personal information or not.
Yeah, good one. Okay.
Or we can, should we, depends. I've got another one here. It looks like someone can't make up their mind. They do and no, they shouldn't.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's probably the right
Yeah,
answer. They do,
yeah,
but no,
yeah,
they shouldn't. So I wouldn't know any investigator that doesn't. Now, am I saying it's actually proper? No, but like you're going to ring up a business and ask if John Smith is there working today because you're such and such from, you know, the legal firm of, you know, Harrison Jones. It's not. It's not. I mean, look, technically pretext calls aren't allowed, but look, if I'm talking practically, you know, how far do you take it? You know, I'm not talking about impersonating anybody. I'm just talking about using investigative methods. Anyway, have more of a think about that. Can you do that? Can you enter someone's yard? What do we think?
No.
At all?
Introduce yourself.
If you're going to introduce yourself, yeah? Okay. Well, look, you know, the Mormons enter people's yards to knock on their door and spread the word. Common law, yes, you can enter, and you can enter a yard to make inquiries. Of course, if you're asked to leave, well, that's a different matter. Yeah, it does. Doesn't extend, obviously, to go into the backyard and have a sniff around or whatever, but you can enter anyone's yard to make inquiries about stuff. I'm not talking about jumping fences or unlocking locked gates either, but you're making lawful inquiries. You've got to remember, as an investigator, you're doing a lawful act, okay? Not doing anything sneaky. I know people and the media and TV paint PIs out to be these sneaky, dodgy people, you know, in trench coats. It's just not like that. You're licensed by the state. You're conducting lawful activities on behalf of a client. Okay, so you're allowed to, you know, you need to go and knock on someone's door to us, and if they want to be interviewed or let them know who you are, yeah. Of course you're allowed to, yeah. Doesn't extend to jumping the fence and seeing what they've got in the backyard, of course, that's trespass. Recording someone, we've talked about, okay, in Queensland we can do it without their consent, as long as you consent. However, I can't leave a recording here and record these two gents, then go out of the room and come back and listen to what they're saying. That's unlawful. You go to New South Wales, you've got to get the person's permission. Other states will probably be similar as well. If you don't get their permission, well, then you're in trouble. Can you put a track on a vehicle? We've talked about that. Go through somebody's letterbox. Yesterday we talked about that. And what would you do if your client wanted you to do some of these things? So this is tricky, as you will have clients in a private capacity that will want you to do some things that are either unlawful or unethical. Okay, so you need to determine, you know, whether they are unlawful or unethical, or whether you're not prepared to do it. But as Paul said yesterday, communicate with them and say, look, I can't do that, it's unlawful. How about we think of this, A, B, C or D? Or no, I'm not prepared to do that. Never be prepared to walk away. Okay, finalising your investigation plan. This is just about how to format your plan, okay? I'm not going to spend a terrible lot of time on this because the places you work for will dictate to you how you plan, what format your plan is in. I sent yesterday to people an investigation plan, just a very rough template. I hope you all got that. If you didn't, let us know. You can make your own. It's okay for you to have your own plan. And if you work for a bigger company, they will guide you into what style they want. So use your own, but be consistent. Your planning documents show your professionalism. So if you are getting a client and you send a plan off to them and it's riddled with mistakes and it's very difficult to read, they're not going to really trust you as a good professional investigator, are they? Reviewing the plan, so you should always monitor it. Okay, plans are fluid things; they're not just something stuck and left. They should be reviewed, especially in terms of resource requirements. And most investigations are fairly fluid, so you need different things, and things will change. Storing the information. We've talked more this morning about storing, but it's ensuring your documentation is stored properly. We won't talk too much more about that. Has limited access to other people. Okay, so if you have an office, who can go in there? Is it locked, etc. Chain of evidence we've talked about. Digital security we've talked about, and confidentiality in the Privacy Act we've also been over, particularly this morning. Okay, little exercise. I'd like you all to give this a go. I've now deputised you all as local laws investigators at the Sunshine Coast Regional Council. Okay, done your Cert 3, licensed, done a bit of PI work, you've scored this great job as an investigator for a council. There's plenty of them out there too, by the way. And you investigate all sorts of things, from illegal dumping to overgrown structures to dog attacks and other things. I'm going to show you a video of something, of an incident, okay? Then we're going to spend about 5 to 8 minutes. I'd like you to jot down a plan, okay? Just jot down on a piece of paper, but think about the things, what am I going to do? So I've been given this job. This lady gets attacked by a dog. She comes into your office and tells you, okay, this is what happens. You're going to see what she tells you. Okay, you don't actually see it yourself, of course. And then I want you to have a bit of a think about, all right, what are my next steps? Who do I have to talk to? Do I need to do anything else? And we'll have a bit of a talk about that afterwards. So there is no sound attached to this, so have a bit of a look-see, and this is what happened to the lady that comes in and reports to you. All right, so that's what's happened. All right, so the lady's come into your office and she's got a really badly injured arm, which she's bandaged up. Her dog has been, the little dog, has been taken to the vet, probably going to die. Okay. The lady in the blue dress grabbed her dog after this, took it to a nearby car, kicked it across the road, maybe have broken its leg, put it in the car and drove off. Okay. So you're a local council investigator. What I want you to do now is think about, right from this moment, she's there, arm bleeding, my dog's going to die, what do I do? Have a think about your plan. What are you going to do next? What's the first thing you're going to do? I'll tell you the first thing you're going to do, make sure the lady's okay, right? That's not even in your plan. Make sure she's attended to. Then I'd like you to at least in dot point step through what you think you should do from then on. Okay, there may have been a number of witnesses. I think we saw one drive past. Okay, another witness. What are you going to do? Spend 5 or 6 minutes just jotting down, having a think about, you know, your activities from this time on. Okay, all right. So let's just have a bit of a talk about, and all I want you to do with this exercise is think about planning. Okay, I know, as far as I know, no one here works for a local council. It doesn't matter, and I keep coming back to the point that investigators are investigators. It doesn't matter who you work for. The tenets, the principles of investigation are the same. So that's why, you know, I could have picked anything. We could have picked the slip and fall yesterday. We could have picked a traffic accident. It doesn't matter. Okay. So for all purposes, today you are working for your local council, which means that you're authorised to undertake this work. There have been some questions, what are we investigating? Dog attacks are against the law. You can't allow your dog to attack someone. That's against local laws in most councils, and also some state acts like the Animal Management Acts and that sort of thing. So once you've satisfied yourself, of course, you know, that you can investigate it, what's the first thing you're going to do? That's I will just, you know, workshop these up here. What are some of the things, well, maybe the gents here?
Immediately you're going to get the latest details, so you're going to know the
Good.
location of the incident,
Yeah.
so where it took place, and you're going to immediately take a statement from her
Good.
to find out exactly what happened from her perspective.
Okay. So detailed and statement. So that's good. Good segue, thank you, into what we're going to be talking about after lunch, taking notes. Okay. So you're going to take good notes about what happened, aren't you? You're going to ask her questions. This is of course asked after you've made sure she's okay, whether she needs to go to the ambulance, she needs any medical attention, of course. What happened? That's going to be asking her whether you take a proper statement from her or notes to commence your investigation is up to you. Okay, so notes and statements, good, thank you. Anything after?
So that's all with the who, what, when, why.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Of course, yeah.
So then once you've got that, you'll probably then start looking for other witnesses.
Okay, so witnesses. So identification of witnesses. How are we going to do that is the question you need to ask. So these will form part of your plan. Okay, so you need to ask yourself, okay, we may have other witnesses, we may not. We know that we do from this. We've got at least one, which was her friend. Okay, 2 actually. In fact, the car drove past. If you didn't notice. Okay, maybe there were other witnesses in the street. How are we going to identify them?
Go to that area and door knock.
Good, good work. Okay, go to that area and door knock.
And obviously there's CCTV there.
Good. Yep.
That's other areas may have.
Okay, so we've got some CCTV. So Paul, what other things, what other investigative planning activities have been mentioned?
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so we've got, what about neighbours? So, yeah, the door knock.
Yep.
Her house has the camera, so request the CCTV footage.
Yes.
Just more information from the victim of what she actually wants investigated.
Yep.
So we've got some, I'm just reading through the statements from the offending dog owner.
Okay, so
And-
statement
and
from the
sh-
offending dog owner. So, yes,
Identify the dog owner.
well, that's right. So we need to find out who
Yeah.
that lady is.
So that's
first.
beforehand is initially identify, and also have we got? I missed it. Have we got actually evaluating what the breach is and finding out
Okay.
what the proofs of that breach are?
Good. So we, as I said when we talked about planning, we need to know what it is we're investigating. It sounds quite simple to say, yeah, well, of course we need to know what it is. But with something like this, you'll need to know what it is you're investigating. I know what it is, if it happened in Queensland. I know the exact act. You don't need to know that, but you need to know that in most councils across the whole country, it's against the local law to allow your dog to attack another dog or person. Okay, and once you find where that is, you look at it and go, all right, what is it I'm exactly investigating? So good, whoever said that was good. Find your legislation. Are there any policy or procedure, like I said, in your plan? Anything else, planning-wise?
Well, if you found a lady with a dog, the aggressive dog, then you'd see if maybe the dog's registered with the council.
Okay, so checking holdings, yeah? So council holdings?
You want to physically view that dog.
Yeah.
Because of that reason, you would probably seize the dog pending the investigation.
Yeah, of course. That would definitely be a plan in the future, which I know as a council officer, that's the first, not the first thing, but that's what the ultimate thing is, to seize the dog, put a declaration on it. What other sorts of things we'll be looking at?
So you'd probably also to give the investigation substance with photographs.
Good. Yep. So photos. So photos are always good. Never be afraid or worried to take photos. Okay? Doesn't matter whether this is a dog attack, whether it's a slip and fall, motor vehicle accident, work site incident, doesn't matter. Paul.
Someone has asked a good question about contacting local vets to see about that other injured dog. Does someone bring it in? And that's a good way of identifying that dog or the owner.
Yeah, can we do that? That's the question. I'm not answering it. I would. In this particular scenario, yes, I would, because I'm authorised to investigate things. It's just a phone call. Has any dog come in with injuries? They'll either tell you or they won't. Yep, finding out the injuries of the dog, that's definite for sure. You probably want to talk to the vet and see the severity of the injuries. So again, you get the idea. We've got all these different things that we can do. We've talked about canvases, we've talked about photos, we've talked about getting the CCTV, getting statements, taking notes, knocking on doors. Never discount that and how important that is to any investigator. A lot of investigators think they can solve everything just sitting behind computers. Sometimes you've got to go out and knock on doors. Talking to people is where you get information. Okay, knowing your legislation, checking your holdings to see what you can find, photos, measurements if you have to. Yeah. She didn't, did she? No. Yeah, that's right. So look, you may not be a council investigator. Let's turn this around completely and say the woman with the small dog is now suing the lady with the big dog. The lawyer, acting for the lady with the small dog, has engaged you as a PI to do some more investigation and build a brief of evidence. Quite plausible for that to happen. Okay, so again, the whole point of this exercise was just to get you thinking about what you're going to need. The next thing you need to do, of course, if there are witnesses, we've got witnesses up here yet, and the person of interest we've got, which we need to identify eventually because they're the person we'll be talking to, is determine what order we're going to do all this in. So this is what planning is all about. Okay, we've talked about the ladies in your office, you're going to attend to her. Then we've said you'll make some notes / get a statement from her. That's going to be your first point of call. Then I'd be suggesting out to the scene you would go. Okay, that's when you're doing your canvass, your door knocks, identifying witnesses. That's when you're taking your photos. That's when you're getting the CCTV. Okay, see where I'm going with that? Then later on, obviously, you'll be checking your holdings. You'll be trying to find out, you might have a registration of a vehicle. You might talk to a witness from your door knock that knows the lady in the blue dress. You don't know what you're going to find out. Investigations are terribly fluid things. They can change all the time. Okay. Anything to add, Paul? All right. Okay, so that is, again, just a short introduction to a planning exercise. Again, think of that in the context of what you actually do. I hope that's helped you a little bit. When you're formally planning, of course, doesn't matter what it is, it's you need to be a little bit more structured in terms of what you're going to do and when, what resources you need, what risks there are, costs, timeframes, all that sort of thing. Okay. Okay, so just to finish off before lunch, you're working as a factual investigator or subcontractor for all Aussie investigations. Okay, you get a job to investigate money laundering. Now, don't panic. Typically, you won't be doing this, but who knows? Some of you I've got big plans for. You need to make an investigation plan about this money laundering. What's happened is Mr. Smith has taken out a loan for which he was required to repay over 5 years. However, after 2 instalments, he purchased a casino and repaid the lot in a lump sum. So what you need to do now is think about the sorts of things you'll need to do in planning this investigation. And this relates to, I think, template 1, the first template. Now you have a copy of this. The information is up there, which I realise you won't be able to see terribly good, but it's about him getting the loan, how much it was for, interest rate, etc. He paid it off, and you've been asked to investigate the matter. So really this is a financial / fraud / money laundering investigation. So in relation to this template, we'll just go through it quickly. I mean, you can probably do this on your own time. Again, it's fill in the blanks, okay? Learner names, who you are, agency name, all Aussie investigations, of course. The nature of the investigation, it's a money laundering investigation. What's the scope? So what have you been asked to do? So remember, scope is what you've been asked by the client to do. Resources you'll need. So think about what you're going to need for this sort of investigation. Okay. What legislation are you working under? Is there policy and procedure? You'll need things like we've said, phone, internet, video and audio recording devices, notebooks, things like that, computers, things, other things. What stakeholders will be involved? Well, we've got banks, tax office, ASIC. There could be a number of different stakeholders. Legal industry requirements that are relevant. Okay, so you need to have a look at things like, and again this has been provided to you, but here's an example, Anti-Money Laundering Act, Proceeds of Crime Act, Casino Control Act, etc. The template then asks you to what were any of the following undertaken. So you can see from the filled in bits there that Mr. Smith and his wife were followed to observe movements. Okay, so there was surveillance. Statements were taken. So statements would obviously be taken in most matters from the complainant, to be one. Witnesses, yes. Well, Mr. Smith's bank manager, etc. What networks would you use? If you use listening devices, tracking devices, video recording, etc. Analysis of existing evidence would relate to the bank records, because with money laundering there's a paper trail. Okay, I wouldn't expect you to be able to, investigate that to any great complexity. I mean, I couldn't either, but there would be a paper trail for those sort of things. So you would be analysing bank documents, loan transactions, all those sort of things, property settlement documents, all those sort of things. And the rest is relatively simple to undertake, and it's in line with stuff we've already talked about details of the planning and implementing, how you would go about doing it, and recommendations. Okay, not terribly complex.